So today it's my pleasure to introduce Kristin Shaeffer. She completed her graduate work at UTSA, so she is an alumna of UTSA. She currently works for the National Minerals Information Center of the U.S. Geological Survey. And today, Kristin is going to share with us what a day in her work life is like as a geoscientist.
Okay, and then I'll be giving the questions for this GeoChat. So what is your job title?
I'm technically a physical scientist.
Okay, and then your employer.
It's U.S. Geological Survey, and then our agency is the National Minerals Information Center.
Okay, and then what areas within geoscience do you use in your current job?
It's kind of complicated, but it's basically just a basic knowledge of the industry in geology, as far as like mining and the geology of what comprises a mine, chemistry of it.
And then do you have any specialization?
Yes, I'm considered the gold specialist, and I also have mercury, but we no longer produce mercury, so it's a little but other countries trade it, so I still have to track it. But I track the domestic gold production across the US.
And when did you first get interested in geoscience?
I've always been interested in geoscience.
What university degrees have you earned?
I have both a bachelor's of science and a master's in science, both of which is from UTSA.
And when you're obtaining those degrees, was it a continuous experience or did you take a break at some point?
I did have a break because I waited for my kids to get a little older, but once I started on the geoscience path, it was a straight trajectory.
So what prompted you to continue your education during that break?
Mainly just because I had needed to get the degree, because I really was interested in getting some type of a job that dealt with the environment.
Okay, and then how did you choose that as your career pathway? More working with minerals?
It wasn't a straight trajectory because, as you know, you just have to go with whatever's available when you're looking for a job. But I just basically was always scanning government jobs, and everything the USGS put out, I applied for everything, whether I thought I was qualified or not. And this is the one that I finally landed. So it was applicable to geoscience because we do track mineral production, but it's the end product versus trying to find it and exploration. So it's a little different.
Okay, so what steps led you to where you are now in your career?
Well, when I first graduated, as soon as I finished my MS in geology, we moved to the Washington, D.C. area. So I was putting out all my applications, and the job that I ended up getting was not one that I had applied for, but it was shared. So when you put out government applications, they do share it between agencies. And it was for a health physicist position, which I didn't even know what a health physicist was. And they wanted me to come in and interview, and couldn't even understand why they wanted me to interview because I'd never heard of the position. But in my resume, because I'd had a lot of physics, and then I did the geochemistry as far as isotopic, geochemistry. And they, I guess whoever found it probably didn't understand the difference between non-ionizing and ionizing radiation. But at any rate, I got a job with NIH. And what really landed me in that position was the fact that when you work in the lab in geosciences, we're pretty safe because we work with acids and different chemicals and stuff. So they were, because of health physicists' response to spills and things in the medical industry, that are comprised of radioactive material. They wanted someone that knew lab safety and that was aware around a lab, and that pretty much landed me in that position. But I still wanted a geologic position, so I just kept applying. So once you have a government position, it's a lot easier to get a position in another agency per se. You still have to put out a lot of applications though.
Okay, so Dr. Godet had a question of why you were applying to USGS positions.
Because it's the US Geological Survey. Who doesn't want a job with the USGS? I would have washed bottles for them. But yeah, that's when I didn't expect to even get a call back with it, because they're notoriously difficult to find a position in. But if you're persistent, you eventually will get one. You just have to be persistent.
Okay, and then is there a specific component of your background that has facilitated your career trajectory, like some sort of training or a licensure?
A lot of the lab work, when we worked in the lab, because you put that in your what they call it, skill sets when you're doing your resume. So it's always important to when you take a course, any course, make sure you keep your syllabus, because you can use that, especially when you first graduate, because you don't have job experience. So take the syllabus, and when you write down your education, put a brief blurb of what you did in that class, because that constitutes is kind of your job at the time. So you can just think of it that way. And those are whatever skill sets you learned in each class. So that's how I landed a lot of interviews, because I would explain and pontificate what I did in each course. So and then that kind of helped me to get picked up by different agencies, and that's how I got the NIH job. But it also, with a government resume, it's not the typical one-page resume that you send out. It's multiple pages. As much as you can get on that in there, you pack into a resume. So I think mine was like 5 pages, and it goes through like a filter before it even gets to a human being. So once you pass the filters, you can get a position. And having all the geoscience, because it's such a diverse area, you kind of can pick up on a lot of different jobs, like environmental, or the the health physicist, which I didn't even know what it was. So you have a lot of skill sets, because we are such a diverse education. We have physics, chemistry, and all of that. So it's good to do that. One thing that really benefited me though was when you take physics, to take the calculus-based physics. That helped quite a bit.
Okay. What kind of activities fill up your workday at the USGS?
So this might be everyone's nightmare if they don't like to write, but my whole job is writing publications. So I collect the data, and I daily, like we get surveys from mines that tell us what their production value is each month. So I make sure everything's correct, and I enter it into a spreadsheet, and I track it for the year. And then I have to write a monthly publication for that commodity, and explain what if there's like a drop in production, try to explain where that came from. And that's where the geology degree kind of comes into helpful, because you read the company reports, and it can be a little technical, but if it's a lot easier if you're a geologist to understand what they're saying and what maybe went wrong with the, like you could have a bulkhead collapse, or it could be weather, it could be, just the fact that they go from a sulfide ore to a non-sulfide ore, and it changes the production value. So being a geologist and having that background is helpful when you go to explain why production changed. But it's mainly, I get data and I write about it. So.
Are these publications open to the public?
They are. They're on our webpage at the National Minerals Information Center, and you can go under the commodity section, and just if you pick gold, you can see all the different publications. I do a monthly. We do what's called a mineral commodity summary, which is sort of like a prediction of what's going to happen in the future, and then I do a yearly publication. Currently, as with the government, it goes from peer review from our agency, and then it goes to what's SPN to another agency for them to edit, and they're backlogged. So I think the last 3 years, I don't think anything, just my tables have been published, but the monthly ones are published on there.
Okay. How has your activities in your workday evolved over time through promotion or career advancement or transition?
When I first started with NIH, I think this kind of goes in with one of your other questions. It was working, I had to go into labs where they used pathogens, like, they worked with Ebola and stuff. So you had to use a positive pressure suit to get in, which, you follow with a tube. And, I had to go into those type of labs and check for radiation spills or clean up after spills if they spilled it when they're using imaging. And then I also had to test the tanks in the basement, because after you're done, as the lab workers are complete with their daily work, they would take showers, to wash everything. And then it would go into a main tank that was cooked. And I had to make sure that there was no radiation and in those tanks before it was released to the sewers. And that was the lab work again at UTSA helped me get that position, because I had to work with a lot of equipment to test for the radiation and different testing techniques. But when I transferred over to when I went to apply for the USGS position, it got me through the door quite quickly, having those skills that I learned at that job. They hired me just because I was very detail orientated, which you kind of need in data. But also with data, the one challenging thing that I've had is that you can't be such a stickler with accuracy as you are, like if you're doing a thesis where it has to be absolutely accurate. That's kind of been difficult for me to do. So I'm a little slower at the publications that I should be, but I'm getting better at that, because sometimes you just have to just let it go. And that's a good skill to kind of keep in mind, but still keep your accuracy as best as you can.
Okay, and what are some geoscience related tools that you use in your workday?
Statistics and economics was very helpful. It's not really quite, but I took a geoeconomics course. So that was, I don't know if UTSA teaches that yet, but basic economics can help. And then also it helped when I took almost, actually, I can apply every job, every skill task that I had, I can apply to a course that I took at UTSA, because it's very broad. And so there's always, it's so encompassing, and you get such a good education that's well-rounded and multidisciplinary. That's the word I'm looking for. It's so multidisciplinary that it really gives you a leg up than any other degree, I think, in my opinion, because you know, at my other job, there was a comment that someone said, oh, now we're hiring geologists instead of health physicists. And my point in return, because I was kind of offended, was, well, I can do your job, but you could never do my job as a geologist. So it's kind of a sort of a secret weapon to have a geoscience degree, because you have such a broad range of skill sets. And that's with any track in geology that you take.
Is there a specific software that you use when you work with data?
Mostly it's Excel. So if you're, and there are a lot of courses that you have that, in geochemistry, there was a lot of skill sets with the Excel spreadsheets that I learned that was very helpful now. But it's mostly Excel that I work with.
What kind of analyses do you perform in your work?
What I'll do is I will pull trade data, and then I also I track the company reports that the companies report to the public, because if they're publicly traded, they send out what their production values are, but they also send us proprietary data. So I'll track the both, and then when I do my publications, I have to make sure that I'm not using proprietary data, but we use the proprietary data as our like for the final state countrywide production, so that we report it to Congress, and Congress uses that data to help with policy making. So if we're having a drop in production and it's a mineral that is needed, then Congress knows that they need to maybe relax some restrictions somewhere, or do something to facilitate more mines opening. It's currently, gold is sort of not quite, it's tracked because of it's easy to tell how the economy is going with the gold, because more people will buy gold when the economy, when things are tough. But for like lithium or any of the new industries with the electric vehicles, those are really watched by Congress. And when we report to them, it's kind of important that they know what the accuracy of that is.
What new skills have you gained in your career since completing your education?
The positive pressure suit, not that I'll need to use it again, that was a skill, but I think the most skill is being able to it's not so much new, but it's polishing what I already learned. So it's not really something new. For example, we write a lot, like each class that you have in geology, usually you have some sort of term paper to write. And it's really invaluable to have, because the better you are at writing and communicating what you've learned in the, in the process, it's easier when you do reports. And I think with any position, you're going to have to do some sort of writing and reports, and keeping the deadlines too.
What other STEM disciplines are applied in your work?
Economics, physics to some degree, depending on that's, like I said, that's how I got my first position, was the physics. The let's see, I kind of apply chemistry sometimes, because I have to explain why certain mines different, because when they change from one type of mineral rock to another, it does it takes a little bit longer for them to extract it when they're at the mill. So then they'll slow down for a month, but then the following month their production will increase. But I have to explain why there's a 10% drop somewhere, and that kind of helps. So economics is pretty much my main core use right now.
And throughout the interview, you suggested courses for students to take. Are there any other courses or skills you recommend for students to work on?
Actually, any course I think that you take it, all the ones that I took at UTSA, I had some sort of benefit from, depending on where you want to focus on. But again, when you finish your degree there, it's such a well-planned degree program that you can almost go into any industry. You can go into oil if you wanted to, you could go into, just environmental. But the key thing is to make sure that you get lab work in. Like if you're doing a project, spend time in the lab, spend time doing, actual physical work, or in the field. If you want to be in the field, go to the field. And that way you can, you just get a better experience. So you can be more confident when you do your interview, and you can explain how you did something and what you learned from that.
Is there a specific course that you would take?
Geochemistry was pretty helpful, because you're in the lab a lot. That was very helpful. And you use a lot of different machines. There's also, like if you're using an X-ray diffraction machine, that's always good. Anything that where you're using lab equipment is a course that I would definitely recommend.
Okay, well, that was all of our questions. So now we're gonna open the floor for a Q&A portion. We can start with Dr. Godet had a question earlier about how many applications you were putting in at the time you were applying.
Well, I have put out 103 just government applications. total. And out of those 103, I have 2 jobs. So the first job I didn't even apply for. It was shared. So they contacted me. But that's where, when you get a job, that's the most important thing, is to not give up. You have to really be persistent. And any position that looks like you might be able to qualify for, you apply for it, because you don't know if they're going to share it. It may not be one that you even want, but just get your foot in the door, and if there's nothing available, take that position and keep looking, which is what I ended up doing in the end too, because I hated being a health physicist. I really hated that job, but I kept with it, and I just kept applying until I found something that I really liked. And I love the job now. It's very because you're with other geologists, although most of them now have gone remote, so we're no longer in the office, but it's just nice to have the camaraderie that you have with fellow geologists.
So these the 103 applications, was this over the course of a year, or what was the time frame?
Probably 2 years. Yeah, probably maybe a little longer actually, because it was probably like first 100, and then yeah, it's hard to say. It was over a period of 2 years, I guess. I think, yeah, because I got this job after 2 years. So it's just kind of, and when you're searching it's a lot easier now to get a government job, because there's so many people went remote. So, just do a search on USA Jobs that is state, countrywide. And then you might find some that will give the remote option. But you do have to fill out a lot of applications. And with the government, they have a process where you first apply, and then it's called like making the cert per se. And that means that HR has deemed that your resume qualifies for the position. And then you wait for an interview. If you are not getting certified, that means that you need to beef your resume. And that's where keeping all those syllabus that you had from all the coursework is important, because you can add like, okay, I took geochemistry, and then just put a blurb on what tasks were performed in geochemistry. And that's in your educational section. So that beefs up your skill set, because since you're just graduating, you don't have job skill sets. It's great if you can have an internship. I never had the opportunity to have internships because we were always moving. So beforehand, so I didn't really have a chance to do that, but that boosted my resume. And once I expanded on my education, I started making the certs all the time, and it was a lot easier. So once you make the cert, you have to wait for interviews, so you may or may not get them. And out of all the applications, I think I maybe had 7 interviews total, so out of 107. So you just can't be, you have to treat it like a job, and you have to just constantly just be putting your resume out there, and you'll get one eventually. Just throw everything at the wall and something's going to stick.
We have another question down here. Oh, where would you recommend for someone to learn more about mineralogy? And do you ever get to visit the mines in person?
Yes, I do get to visit the mines. That's fun. That's a lot of fun. Although with gold mines, they're a little secure. They're a little secure. So you can't just go in and you can't like get core samples or rock samples. But I did go with another colleague to a porphyry mine in South Carolina, and we got to take whatever rocks we wanted, which as a geologist, we always like that. And then you get to learn how the product's made, and learn how the mine processes go. And as far as, what was your first part of your question again?
Where do you suggest students learn more about mineralogy?
For mineralogy, I think I took 2 coursework on mineralogy, and it was just the basic mineralogy course, and I also took optical mineralogy. But for learning, it's just basically just through the coursework, and then you have little bits of mineralogy and geochemistry as you take each one of your courses, because they all kind of layer on to each other. So it's like a sandwich with geology. You first take your core, and then as you get, higher up, you use a little bit of what you learned before to expound upon, as you get into the more advanced classes.
When you visit the mines, are they far from you?
The one gold mine in the U.S. that was closest to me was South Carolina. So I drove down there, and that's where I went to the Hale gold mine. And that was interesting. It was nice to see their core sample room where they're looking at different core samples with the gold in it. And it's just, you'd think there'd be big chunks, but it's just tiny little flecks. It looks almost like, pyrite in it. And I got to tour that. They didn't let me go to the actual open pit part because they were just kind of picky. But I am supposed to go to Nevada, where there's a large amount of mines this summer. So we'll see how that goes, and if maybe I can get one of them to let me in. Sometimes they let you in, and they see, you can see the mill. You can see how they pour the doré, which is like just the raw gold after they're done, but I have not had a chance to do that yet. And also, I missed it this year, but when you go to conferences like PDAC, which is in Canada, and that's where all the mining companies gather together, and they present. We get to go to those a lot. So anything that applies to the industry. Some people got to go to France this year. I missed out on that one too. I need to be better about submitting my requests. I was just busy this year, but we travel quite a bit, and we travel throughout the country so that you can get, you make contacts. And once you make contacts with the mining companies, you have a better chance of them reporting to us, what their production values are. They're very, especially with gold, they're very edgy on giving the data out. As long as you know that it stays proprietary, they're okay. But it takes a personal visit sometimes to get them to open up.
Well, it's really neat that you get to go to the mines sometimes.
And they give you presents. I got a book, actually. They gave you a book. I was like, oh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
So the history of the gold mine. So they're very nice. You just it's just and it's hard because you have to get out of your shell. So if you're not a very gregarious person, if you're sort of shy, it is a little difficult when you're going to this big, huge mining company, especially for gold, because you have to go through all these guard checks, and then you have to go through training because you're going to go into the mine or around it. And it's just, it's a little intimidating, but you get used to it. So that's one thing I would say as a student to kind of prep for, is to, when you're going to the field, or when you get to meet with people, or even if you're just presenting, because, if you don't do it for a while, you get really nervous, and you even now, because I haven't presented in so long, it's hard to speak publicly. So that's one thing that I would recommend that you practice and try to keep up with that, because when you haven't done it for a while, it's just sort of, it's not as easy as riding a bike. Because when I was like with UTSA, when you're imagining your career, you're thinking of being a geologist where you're going to extricate the material, not see what happens afterwards. So that's probably one of the most interesting things about the position, is because I see what happens with the end products and what goes. And there's also it's in our branch, we have they just changed the name. It's like Mineral Intelligence Group, which they are actually hiring a position for a intern, which I can send to you, Alex, if you want afterwards. It's
absolutely.
But that's another thing I probably should bring up. For government jobs, when you're searching, look up pathways. And what that is the Pathways program is for recent grads. And if you graduate within 2 years, and it's sort of like a mentorship type program. And you'll start, if you have a master's, you'll start at like a GS9. And you usually have a ladder that goes to a 12 or a 13. And, you get promoted as you learn throughout the grade. And usually you can get promoted within the year. USGS is a little bit stingy on promotions, but I finally capped out on mine finally. But it's just, they're just a little bit slower on their promotions, but other agencies are really quick, and you can go up the ladder pretty quickly. But if you go to the Pathways program, it's meant for recent grads, and that's really good to do. Oh, and I guess I lost track of what I was saying. We have like another group that's the mineral intelligence, and they track the flow of the minerals and like the product. So like if there's any issues with how it's being used, or what needs to be used in industry itself. So there's a lot of different components of our department, and then we report it again to Congress, and they use that for policy making.
Thank you.
Actually, I can forward that to you now. I think I can find it, but yeah, and yeah, I'll forward that to you.
So I think that answered a bit of Dr. Godet's question.
I think so. Yes.
But the one thing about that I learned, at least especially with UTSA, because there's so many, because I've been to a lot of schools because my husband's in the Army, and we transferred quite a bit. So I've been to Georgia State. I went to school in Washington for a while. I went to University of Missouri at Kansas City, and UTSA was by far the best because the professors, like all of you guys, like helped when if you didn't have clarity on something, you could easily go talk to somebody and they would explain it. And the camaraderie that it's almost like a family. Like you always felt you had a safety net, but yet at the same time, the answer wasn't given to you. The tools to find the answer yourself was given, and that's a great asset to have, is to know where to find the answer and how to do it on your own, and not have it given to you. So I think in every class that I took at UTSA, it was very comprehensive in that aspect. And while some courses were more challenging than others, and it could be very frustrating, being frustrated was a great thing to have, because you learn how to overcome that, and to learn ways about how to, when you're stuck with something, how do you overcome that? And UTSA helped that quite a bit. So
Okay, hopefully you didn't answer this question yet. Dr. Hashenberger had a question of how have you built your writing skills since taking your coursework?
My writing skills were really pretty good when I graduated. When you write for the government, they have a different way of the citations are totally different, but because I had a great foundation, it was easy to adapt. Like there's some things I write and the editors will say, oh, we don't say that, we say owing to, or instead of because of. So there's just like a little bit of verbiage that changes when you go to a government position, and each agency sometimes has their little quirky ways of writing. You probably get that in industry as well, but if you have the ultimate foundation of writing and really trying to do your best with writing publications, that's very beneficial. So it's if you hate writing, I think geology as a whole it's going to be very difficult. But if you don't mind it, you can get a job that's in the field and just write regular reports. But even then, you need to be pretty clear on what you're saying, especially with industry even. So it's but because I write every day, I think I'm a lot quicker at trying to explain the data than I was when I first started. It just takes a while sometimes once you learn the lingo and how things are done, and there's just a certain way of doing things.
What do you like the most about writing the reports?
When I put it for peer review, because I'm done with it, they're pretty extensive. Like some of the reports are, I think, 15 pages long, like the yearly report is. And I can't even write a sentence, especially for my commodity. I can't even write a sentence without having a calculation to do. So it's it can be a little tedious. Other commodities, like I peer review silver and diamonds and gemstones, And the Diamond and Gemstone publication is more of like an industry outlook, so it doesn't have a lot of calculations to it, but you have to like read a lot of industry publications and get knowledge with the industry in itself in order to compose a decent publication, which that can be challenging in itself, but I just have to review it, so I don't have to do that one. Mine's mainly just calculations and the changes in production and trade. And I also do prices, like when gold prices change.
Do you have to present any of your publications, even maybe to your team?
No, no, we haven't had to do that. We do get called upon, like if there have been cases where we get called upon as an expert in a commodity to testify, like when they smuggling gold, things like that. I get a lot of emails from people that are looking for like what happens with gold production in Africa, because they have a lot of illegal gold mining. So it's kind of hard to track where the production is coming from. And so you have to use the trade. So if they're saying their production's only, a certain amount, but their trade, they're exporting more than that production value, well, where's the difference come from? And so you kind of have to do a little bit of investigating on that. And when you do that, sometimes we do present what our findings are. I haven't had to do that so far,
But you're prepared to do so.
Yeah. I did get an email with a picture from the FBI sent it, wanting to know if it was doré. But as a geologist, you get a picture and you're like, I can't do anything with it. I need to see it. So it's kind of hard to say, but you just answer it as best you can.
Wow, so they didn't call anybody in. They thought that the picture was sufficient.
They I guess they stopped somebody that was that had it on them going into a country, and so they were wanting to know if it was a typical doré or whatever. And without a chemical analysis, you can't like say, well, yeah, that is. So it's kind of, but they don't know what we know, so they just ask anyway. So we get a lot of emails about that, or not a lot, but I get them from time to time. So. And there's also another aspect with gold mining, because of the illegal gold trade industry. It's called the good. I'm trying to remember. If, for example, Apple, when they buy the gold chips, where are they purchasing their gold from? So when they have to make sure that who they purchase it from, that it's sourced from an ethical source, not from like buying it from somewhere in Africa that you can't determine that it's a non-conflict mineral.
So is there any companies that you guys work with specifically, or is it mostly mining or mines?
We deal with the mining companies, but then we have the other aspect of the policy making and stuff. So we get inquiries from like different government agencies that ask us, what the production of some certain countries that do produce a lot of illegal gold, what was the export, or sometimes some companies are just really difficult to trace. Like they'll send their stuff to be refined, which most of the refineries are in Switzerland, and then you have to try to trace it back. It can be a little tedious. Sometimes I don't have time for that, but if there's a certain country that I'm looking for, I do have to try to track it. And that's where the research, your research skills for geology kind of comes into play, because you were used to digging for stuff or digging for publications, and that kind of helps.
And then Dr. Haschenberger has a question. If you had to offer one piece of advice to undergraduate majors about pursuing a career in geoscience, what would it be?
I definitely think if you like the sciences, but you're not sure what you want to do, like if you want, that geoscience has such a broad, as I said before, has such a broad, it's so multidisciplinary that it's a great degree to get as a foundation. I used to get asked, well, what are you going to do as a geologist? And the best answer is, what can't you do? We do physics, we do chemistry, we do, all kinds of things. And so it's just a very well-rounded education to have. And it's very applicable in industry. And just because you get a degree in something, also it may not be what your job ends up being. So like I said, my first job was for a health physicist, but you're still using your science background in that position. And as you work in that position, you can build your skills and keep applying to look for the job that you really do want. So my recommendation is, like, when students first graduate, don't turn down those jobs that seem so tedious. If there's a skill set that they could give you, take the position, take the skill sets. And it's easier to find a job when you already have a job, especially a better job, because then you're not searching, you're not home broke, I guess, while you're looking for a position. And you also learn to network. You can network. So once you know one person in an industry, they may have another position, especially with the government. They might have another position at a different agency. So it's always good to do that.
Do you think a minor in geoscience would be enough to get a job at the USGS?
It would depend on what your major is. Like, there's some people that have my position that they're an economist. Most of them are just geologists or economists, though. There are a lot of different jobs, like there's biology jobs and stuff that they have at the USGS, but you're not going to be doing geoscience per se.
Do the economists have backgrounds in geology?
No, which is why they kind of like to hire for our positions. They like to hire geologists, and they do help in that fact that they come at a question with a different perspective than a geologist would. But a geologist has a little bit more of a rapport with the mining industry itself, because there's just that camaraderie you have amongst, the geosciences, that you can, apply it when you go to talk to people in the industry. The economists are more analytical, and they just analyze the data. Whereas, we look for more reasoning. As a geologist, you look for reasoning behind why data changed.
And then, is there a specific credential, training, or other qualification that would be helpful for students in securing a position at the USGS or the USGS National
Minerals Information Center?
Information Center.
I think GIS is helpful to have, like to have some GIS on you, because that whenever somebody gets on board with GIS, I know my boss is always like, oh, but like, we all have GIS, all of us, well, all the geologists do, but a lot of us don't say so because we don't want to do the extra work, because it's like an extra duty. But I like the GIS. But GIS is always good to have in your wheelhouse, just because things are going more, digital, as far as like the maps and things like that. But pretty much, anything in geology, I think, as long as you have a hands-on and you're actually, making some sort of end product. Like if you're doing GIS and you're, making maps, you can use that in your resume and you can pad it. Or if you're working in the lab, I would even recommend, like, if like someone needs help in a lab, to volunteer for that, so that you can say you have experience in the lab, because that's hands-on experience that it's invaluable to have that. You can say you took a class, but if you actually did something, it's just more tangible.
And now that you're working at the USGS, kind of from an inside perspective, can you see why now you put in 100 applications, like why that was necessary? or like why that would have happened? Like they have all these applicants.
Well, they do have a lot of applicants. I guess that's a really good question, because there were people that were applying, and for some reason they would, we would interview and nobody would be hired. Nobody was hired. And I think what it was is people were, they weren't taking the opportunity and running with it. They were like putting our agency sort of like, oh, well, I might want the job, but I don't know. And then, they didn't just take it. So it's good that when you apply for a job, and if you have an opportunity to, even if it's one that you don't really want, but it's at the agency you want, do everything you can to show interest in that position, especially after an interview or during an interview. And if you're given the offer, to just, take the offer, because you can always move up from there. When you're in one agency, you learn about others. Like even I get emails all the time. They're called swaps. So they give you the opportunity, if you want to, that you can go and do a temporary duty somewhere else, and they're all over in the United States, but it's only open to USGS people. So if, even if it's not particularly a job you want, I would say take the job at the agency you want, and then you can laterally move anywhere from there.
So USGS is a great agency.
I have not, let's just say I have not filled out an application since I've got this job. And thanks to Janet for being my reference. So she helped me out. That's another good thing, is make sure that you're, when you're interacting with your professors, that they know that you're engaging, and that they can see your work ethic, because if you don't, they can't vouch for you. They can't tell your prospective employer what kind of employee you would be, because you haven't shown to them, any indication of what you'd be. So it's very good to engage with your professors.
Okay, and then is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on today?
Don't give up. Don't give up. Just like I said, if it takes 50 applications, just keep pumping them out. And then, the more you're getting, if you're not getting called, then you need to tailor your resume somehow, like rewrite it or get help with that. I think I did probably maybe 4 or 5 reiterations of my resume before I started getting at least past the cert, because I wasn't putting enough keywords in. And once I did that, and I used, like I said, I expanded upon what I did in each course, then I started getting a lot of the callbacks that I wanted. So I had quite a few from the EPA. So the EPA hires a lot of geologists because they're physical scientists. So that's another agency that is good to work for, but they're not as good as the USGS. So our job is very inclusive. It's very, they try to do their best to be as diverse as they possibly can. And they're very, I just feel prideful working for them, because it's a great working environment. They don't cultivate like toxic work environments. It's just more of a, it's a professional, and camaraderie. So they do everything they can to make sure that everybody feels like they have a very comfortable and productive work environment.
Okay, well, thank you, Kristin.
You're welcome.
Thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, if you guys don't have any questions, we can end our meeting here. Thanks for coming.